as much as he used to, that is plain enough to me," her ladyship said to Sir Harry afterward. "And he is a changed man in a measure, and incredible as it may seem, Harry, it is my opinion that he is being made into a human being through nothing more nor less than his affection for that innocent, affectionate little fellow. Why, the child actually loves him, leans on his chair and against his knee. His own children would as soon have thought of nestling up to a tiger." The very next day she went to call upon Mrs. Errol. When she returned, she said to her brother, "Molyneux, she is the loveliest little woman I ever saw. She has a voice like a silver bell, and you may thank her for making the boy what he is. She has given him more than her beauty, and you make a great mistake in not persuading her to come and take charge of you. I shall invite her to Lorridaile." "She'll not leave the boy," replied the Earl. "I must have the boy too," said Lady Lorridaile, laughing. But she knew Fauntleroy would not be given up to her, and each day she saw more clearly how closely those two had grown to each other, and how all the proud, grim old man's ambition and love and hope centered themselves in the child, and how the warm, innocent nature returned his affection with most perfect trust and good faith. She knew, too, that the prime reason for the great dinner party was the Earl's secret desire to show the world his grandson and heir, and to let people see that the boy who had been so much spoken of and described was even a finer little specimen of boyhood than rumor had made him. "Bevis and Maurice were such a bitter humiliation to him," she said to her husband. "Every one knew it. He actually hated them. His pride has full sway here." Perhaps there was not one person who accepted the invitation without feeling some curiosity about little Lord Fauntleroy, and wondering if he would be on view. And when the time came, he was on view. "The lad has good manners," said the Earl. "He will be in no one's way. Children are usually idiots or boors. Mine were both. But he can actually answer when he's spoken to, and be silent when he is not. He is never offensive." But he was not allowed to be silent very long. Every one had something to say to him. The fact was, they wished to make him talk. The ladies petted him and asked him questions, and the men asked him questions too, and joked with him, as the men on the steamer had done when he crossed the Atlantic. Fauntleroy did not quite understand why they laughed so sometimes when he answered them, but he was so used to seeing people amused when he was quite serious that he did not mind. He thought the whole evening delightful. The magnificent rooms were so brilliant with lights, there were so many flowers, the gentlemen seemed so gay, and the ladies wore such beautiful, wonderful dresses and such sparkling ornaments in their hair and on their necks. There was one young lady who, he heard them say, had just come down from London, where she had spent the season, and she was so charming that he could not keep his eyes from her. She was a rather tall young lady with a proud little head and very soft dark hair, and large eyes the color of purple pansies, and the color on her cheeks and lips was like that of a rose. She was dressed in a beautiful white dress and had pearls around her throat. There was one strange thing about this young lady. So many gentlemen stood near her and seemed so anxious to please her that Fauntleroy thought she must be something like a princess. He was so much interested in her that, without knowing it, he drew nearer and nearer to her, and at last she turned and spoke to him. "Come here, Lord Fauntleroy," she said, smiling, "and tell me why you look at me so." "I was thinking how beautiful you are," his young lordship replied. Then all the gentlemen laughed outright, and the young lady laughed a little too, and the rose color in her cheeks brightened. "Ah, Fauntleroy," said one of the gentlemen who had laughed most heartily, "make the most of your time. When you are older, you will not have the courage to say that." "But nobody could help saying it," said Fauntleroy sweetly. "Could you help it? Don't you think she is pretty too?" "We are not allowed to say what we think," said the gentleman, while the rest laughed more than ever. But the beautiful young lady, her name was Miss Vivian Herbert, put out her hand and drew Cedric to her side, looking prettier than before, if possible. "Lord Fauntleroy shall say what he thinks," she said, "and I am much obliged to him. I am sure he thinks what he says." And she kissed him on his cheek. "I think you are prettier than any one I ever saw," said Fauntleroy, looking at her with innocent, admiring eyes. "Except Dearest. Of course, I couldn't think any one quite as pretty as Dearest. I think she is the prettiest person in the world." "I am sure she is," said Miss Vivian Herbert, and she laughed and kissed his cheek again. She kept him by her side a great part of the evening, and the group of which they were the center was very gay. He did not know how it happened, but before long he was telling them all about America, and the Republican rally, and Mr. Hobbs, and Dick, and in the end he proudly produced from his pocket Dick's parting gift, the red silk handkerchief. "I put it in my pocket to-night because it was a party," he said. "I thought Dick would like me to wear it at a party." And queer as the big, flaming, spotted thing was, there was a serious, affectionate look in his eyes which prevented his audience from laughing very much. "You see, I like it," he said, "because Dick is my friend." But though he was talked to so much, as the Earl had said, he was in no one's way. He could be quiet and listen when others talked, and so no one found him tiresome. A slight smile crossed more than one face when, several times, he went and stood near his grandfather's chair, or sat on a stool close to him, watching him and absorbing every word he uttered with the most charmed interest. Once he stood so near the chair's arm that his cheek touched the Earl's shoulder, and his lordship, detecting the General's smile, smiled a little himself. He knew what the lookers-on were thinking, and he felt some secret amusement in their seeing what good friends he was with this youngster, who might have been expected to share the popular opinion of him. Mr. Havisham had been expected to arrive in the afternoon, but, strange to say, he was late. Such a thing had really never been known to happen before during all the years in which he had been a visitor at Dorincourt Castle. He was so late that the guests were on the point of rising to go in to dinner when he arrived. When he approached his host, the Earl regarded him with amazement. He looked as if he had been hurried or agitated. His dry, keen old face was actually pale. "I was detained," he said in a low voice to the Earl, "by an extraordinary event." It was as unlike the methodic old lawyer to be agitated by anything as it was to be late, but it was evident that he had been disturbed. At dinner he ate scarcely anything, and two or three times, when he was spoken to, he started as if his thoughts were far away. At dessert, when Fauntleroy came in, he looked at him more than once, nervously and uneasily. Fauntleroy noted the look and wondered at it. He and Mr. Havisham were on friendly terms, and they usually exchanged smiles. The lawyer seemed to have forgotten to smile that evening. The fact was, he forgot everything but the strange and painful news he knew he must tell the Earl before the night was over, the strange news which he knew would be so terrible a shock, and which would change the face of everything. As he looked about at the splendid rooms and the brilliant company, at the people gathered together, he knew, more that they might see the bright-haired little fellow near the Earl's chair than for any other reason, as he looked at the proud old man and at little Lord Fauntleroy smiling at his side, he really felt quite shaken, notwithstanding that he was a hardened old lawyer. What a blow it was that he must deal them! He did not exactly know how the long, superb dinner ended. He sat through it as if he were in a dream, and several times he saw the Earl glance at him in surprise. But it was over at last, and the gentlemen joined the ladies in the drawing-room. They found Fauntleroy sitting on the sofa with Miss Vivian Herbert, the great beauty of the last London season. They had been looking at some pictures, and he was thanking his companion as the door opened. "I am ever so much obliged to you for being so kind to me," he was saying. "I never was at a party before, and I've enjoyed myself so much." He had enjoyed himself so much that when the gentlemen gathered about Miss Herbert again, and began to talk to her, as he listened and tried to understand their laughing speeches, his eyelids began to droop. They drooped until they covered his eyes two or three times.